It is not a sin to have ambition. How you go about accomplishing your goals can be seen as such depending on your morals or those of others. Let me draw your attention to another room of the castle, the throne room. A year and a half ago, the throne itself was removed and the space turned into a boardroom where the Council of Seven met to run the city. Depending on the agenda for the day, the central table was either a full circle or a semicircle. In actuality, the circular table is just two semicircles pushed together, but it's pretty nifty that they have it in the budget for two tables. Today was a semicircle day. The council had many meetings set up with two types of people: those who came in with problems and those who became. Today was a semicircle day. The council had many meetings set up with two types of people: those who came with problems and those who came because they themselves were a problem. Sometimes the second category never made it home, but ultimately the idea was the number of problems was reduced by at least one per meeting. Today, we'll be sitting in on a meeting between the council, classification not a problem, by their own ruling, and a merchant, classification pending, here to establish trade route with the city he hailed from. This was the merchant's first assignment. He was here to make a name for himself, far from rags to riches. This was the merchant's first assignment. He was here to make a name for himself. Far from a rags to riches story, he grew up well off and was given many opportunities thanks to familial connections. With this assignment, he wanted to prove he could do things on his own, not because of those he knew. He'd heard of the city appearing as if from nowhere only 2 years prior, secluded and desperate for trade in order to survive. He proposed the idea to his superiors and spent days without rest detailing the startup costs and projected profits such a trade route could bring. He was here by himself, no backup, and now facing down 6 council members. Yes, just 6. The third chair was empty. This emptiness was currently classified as a problem solved by the council according to official records, but I don't remember what position that was meant for or who held it prior. Probably not important, but I can introduce you to the other 6. The first chair is held by the current Archmage, Frankie Crinkett, a human who is completely disinterested in being there. Since the council was established, no one has been able to keep the position for more than a month for one reason or another. One main reason being death, but others, like the former Archmage, classification on the verge, just simply disappear. Archbishop Gwengren Griss holds the second chair. She is a satyr, half goat, half righteous indignation, and is the leader of the Church of the Forgotten One. You see, according to what records were recovered after the Awakening, there is a god that exists, and they just forgot the name of them. There are other gods and goddesses, yes, but this church is convinced there is another that everyone has forgotten about. Not them, though. They believe, and they know they are out there. And what's more, they're adamant that nobody can or should know any more about it. Any details that are claimed to be recovered about the Forgotten One are quickly classified as a problem by the church and done away with. Do they have proof? If they did, by sacred decree, it is no more. The Archbishop just asks for your unwavering faith. Julian LaRue, leader of the Knights of the Blinking Eye, the policing force of the city, sits in the fourth chair, and is the only remaining member of the 20 hands I was telling you about earlier. Hi, Julian. We like Julian. The Blinking Eye helped to keep the citizens safe during the chaotic times, holding the growing factions back from fighting one another until order was established. I'm sure their purpose hasn't changed at all. The last 3 seats are held by 3 members of the trade union. Brothers Hina and Maya Fitzbert, a halfling and a dwarf, they don't like to talk about it, and a human named Arlington. The trade union is in charge of, you guessed it, trade. Any and all things and people are not to enter or leave the city without the trade approval. They were responsible for keeping the city fed after the sleep, when farming proved to be very difficult on the land. The King of Slumber's vault was chock full of magical items that they traded away for food and resources. No one knows how much they still have. Well, Wink caught a glimpse of that but didn't count them. But finding alternatives was on their to-do list.
Hello and welcome to Stories Across Borders. Here we discuss stories told across a range of different mediums, books, games, movies, comics, all that good stuff. Our only rule, though, is that we can only discuss these things in terms of the story, something that I probably should have told my guest about beforehand. Anything like acting, animation, art, or mechanics is out unless it relates directly to how the story is being told, but that probably won't be a problem today. I'm Daniel Radford, author, begrudging postal worker, and also your host, and for this episode I'm joined by special guest Marv and Dan, the creators of a truly insane web serial called Secrets of Slumber, a snippet of which you just heard.
Hello.
Hey, happy to be here.
Me too.
So, before we get into all the stuff about narrators and perspective shifts and things like that, I kind of want to give our audience a bit of context first because I feel like if ever a story needed context, it's yours. So I very much like Secrets of Slumber, and a part of that is because it is as intriguing as it is bizarre. So perhaps as the resident authorities on the subject, you guys would like to explain just a bit about what this creation of yours actually is, and we'll talk a bit about the general idea of it before we get into the more theme relevant stuff, and the audience can deal with it.
Yeah, so I guess I can start with how it came to be. One of my friends approached me and was just like, "Hey, do you want to be the dungeon master for a D&D campaign?" So I said yes, but also I'm not huge into Dungeons and Dragons lore. I didn't want to learn a bunch um of their gods and their religions and memorize their maps and worlds. So I took the lazy way out and I created my own. Which meant that when I was running the campaign, I could never be wrong because I was making up that whole world. So I created a world, I created a society, I let them kind of make their characters in it. And then as we played, the story became this interesting, fascinating thing to me. So I was telling Marv about it, and well, Marv decided to write it down.
I could not do it because I like him telling me about it. I'm just like, my man, this sounds like some Terry Pratchett esque stuff. It is so intriguing, so wild, so out there. And I'm like, you need to turn it into something to share it because I can see it being like a TV show or a book. And he's like, I don't know how to write. I'm like, I do. Let's do it.
You're not wrong. Like I don't know a lot about Terry Pratchett. I need to know more, but my general gist is that his work is somehow incredibly gripping and meaningful, whilst also being completely batshit insane.
It
And
is. I've only read a couple of his works, like The Color of Magic, like the first of the Discworld, and it is bonkers. It is all over the place and it is wonderful.
Well, and it was part of Terry Pratchett who inspired um, the rough premise. Most of what I wanted to do was have several adventures that my players could go on, and I wanted to guide them to pick a lane and kind of choose their own adventure by giving them mail to deliver. Terry Pratchett wrote years ago a story about someone who's like delivered mail in a magical world, completely different world, but that premise went in a very different direction. And I just like the idea of let's give them some mail, they pick a letter, they go on a wacky adventure to go around and deliver it, finally giving someone some mail, and then pick a next letter and go on the next adventure. And while that's still a general theme throughout the story, we have folks delivering mail for a magical post office. There's definitely a lot more going on in the context of the world of Slumber.
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, even before you factor in that the basic premise of this story is delivering the mail, which I had no idea about the Terry Pratchett story. I thought this was just some insanity that was completely original, and I wouldn't have been surprised having known you for a little bit at this point. It definitely has a very you feel to it. But the actual setting of Slumber is really interesting and intriguing. I can't think of anything that's quite like it. Like this, the sheer scale of the thing that it deals with. Because we have amnesia plots; those are everywhere.
Yeah.
But you made a city that is one big amnesia plot.
Well, part of it is I think if you want to have mystery, you have to have unknowns. And what's more mysterious than an entire city who really doesn't know their own history? They've got to figure out agriculture. They've got to figure out how to survive on their own, because they were asleep for however many years they were asleep for, all kind of woke up at the same time without a lot of memory of who they were and what they were doing, which honestly wasn't something I explored too much. but Marv in her writing has really helped flesh out that basic idea and turn it into something a little bit more deep and impactful for the characters going through it, which I loved because I didn't explore that idea too much when I was kind of writing the campaign.
I need to know. I need to know how the reason behind things. It's like, okay, this thing is gonna, because like I write stories a lot. Nothing gets finished, but a lot of stories that I write, I'm approaching a D&D campaign from the aspect of it turning it into a novel. I need to have some structure. D&D campaigns, you can have some little to no structure and just wing it and stuff, but if you're building a story with like, beginning, middle, end kind of thing, you gotta have some structure. So I'm like, okay, what are the mechanics behind it? Tell me everything. And we're slowly discovering it as we go because he doesn't have all the answers either. And so it's been fun to also be able to play around and add my own stuff to it as well. And it's been fun to play in his little playground.
I've got to admit, it must be cool to have like someone become so enthralled in your idea that they like, great, I'm going to write an entire book about it effectively. I mean, it's a web serial, so it may well be longer than a book by the end.
Oh, it will.
Absolutely. I mean, it was fun creating the sandbox, right? Because that's what I did. I made this big sandbox, populated it with characters, hidden storylines, and it's cool to see Marv create brand new characters who I didn't anticipate and have them interact with my world. And I'm just like, yeah, that can happen, but only if this happens too, because of this thing that I forgot to tell you about, but it's really important later on. So
Mhm.
it's almost like replaying the campaign with a new set of characters who all just live in Marv's mind.
Mhm.
You've started a new save file and you're choosing different options.
It essentially it is, yeah, because literally in the first chapter, it's the narrator says it's a retelling because it's technically a retelling because I'm just retelling the story, from a different angle, but it's essentially everything that happens, like as a core event happens in the original campaign. So it's like it's a retelling and it's more to it than just what he did. And I wasn't there. I wasn't part of the original campaign, so I don't know exactly what every minute decision every character made. So I gotta, come up with that myself and fill in little blanks that I find here and there. I'm like, oh, I need somebody to do this or a function here. Dan never mentioned anything or doesn't have anything. Cool. I will fill that in now with this person or place or thing. And it's been a lot of fun to try to make it all work and connect.
I would say it's working out well. As a sidebar, because we have kind of skirted around the actual nature of Slumber a bit, just to
Yeah.
fill the audience in. Basically, Slumber is a fairly isolated city. It was ruled by this crazy evil Lich King guy for no one knows how long, really. Then a bunch of adventurers came through that whole shtick, took out the Lich King, and left. And all the people who were under his thrall suddenly woke up in the middle of whatever they were doing, with no idea who they were, where they were, what they were doing, and are now trying to essentially resettle the city that they were already living in.
Yep. That's
Absolutely. And we kind of enter the story about 2 years after that fact. So we've already have like a rudimentary government system who like trying to keep control, trying to create order. We've got folks who are they've like ransacked and decided to just take over the bigger houses through basically force. So we got like a whole neighborhood of thugs who just wanted the nice stuff. So it's kind of it's a society who's still learning, but still there's some development there that's helping create some tension, some drama, and some intricate different social behaviors, I think, because the characters, they don't really know where they're from, so they're kind of making it up as they go.
Mhm.
That's actually one of the things that drew me to actually give the story a go was that your blurb, tagline, synopsis, whichever one we're going with, was basically talking about consequences. Because something that drives me mad in so many stories, I'm pretty sure I went on like a 15-minute spiel about this in one of our Star Wars episodes, was how very rarely stories actually deal with the consequences of toppling the evil empire or the tyrant king or whatever. And they
Mm.
just assume that everything after that is sunshine and rainbows, when the reality is you're suddenly left with a power vacuum destroyed cities, people in need of aid of different kinds, people vying for control, trying to establish new orders and factions. And I think Slumber illustrates that so well. These people are in the process of like picking up the pieces and trying to figure everything out and figure out who they are. And I think you've done a really cool job on the setting, and Marv has done a really good job of like showing narratively the impact of that situation, and I appreciate that a lot.
Thank you. I try.
You definitely try. And I agree. It absolutely shows in Marv's writing. One of my favorite things is kind of the idea. There's a group. I won't get into too much spoilers, but they're pretty set on like, well, we don't really know what was happening when the Lich King was around, but can we go back to that? Because that was probably fine. Like, we didn't need to reinvent farming. We survived. And so it's that idea of, yeah, we were oppressed, but there was always a small part of you who's just like, maybe let's go back to that. Most of the city's like, no, we're fine, let me live. But there's that small community that's just like, eh.
Change is scary, especially when you were a mindless thrall previously and now have suddenly had sentience thrust back upon you and have to figure that out.
Right? Ignorance
Yeah.
being bliss, it's a thing.
I mean, like, think of how complicated it is to get a city up and running just in reality, and then you throw magic bullshit into that.
Yeah.
And they're still trying to figure out magic too. They've got no idea it exists. They play with it. It's a thing, but like no one knows how to cast it. So it's pretty dangerous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the funniest things to me about the whole setting is that you have the like official like mage society, and none of them have a clue what they're doing.
It's a lot of fun to do that. Yeah, it's just like they're experimenters, if anything. They are like, okay, we are the ones who got to the crap first. We're in charge of it because staking our claim. But yeah, we don't know what we're doing, and we're gonna keep trying because that's what everyone expects from us now.
I feel like any prestige or respect they have is built entirely on their ability to talk a good game. I mean, Horn
Yes.
certainly seems to think that they're legit.
Of course, Horn doesn't know better.
Why wouldn't he? They've got the whole building and everything. They must.
They've got robes. They have to be real mages.
They have mage in their names. They've got to be great. They gotta know what they're doing.
They picked the names themselves because they couldn't remember the old ones, but it's fine.
Of course.
Exactly. I don't know if it's obvious between the themes of folks trying to move backwards or folks pretending to know what's going on, and just the overall chaos of the city. But this was definitely written and created starting during the pandemic. Those were a lot of major themes going on in my mind at the time when I was creating this setting.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, it's goofy in a way. It's mysterious. It's fantastical. But it's also a very accurate representation of human society in general, I think, in that it really just, like, thousands upon thousands of idiots all meshed together, doing their best and hoping to God it works. But, when you have that many, a mass of characters like that, you are bound to have a few characters in there that stand out and are worth telling stories about. I assume that your protagonists and major antagonist stem primarily from characters who were player characters or major villains in the campaign.
Yeah, all of the main party, if you will, yeah, they're all based on the actual player characters that were in the original campaign. They're not exactly the same, but I found like some archetypes that I liked and some character traits from the player characters that they had. I'm like, oh, I can totally see this character like this or this character like that. And so I just made some characters from that and ran with it. And so far it's turning out okay. I like them.
I mean, that because they were all created in part by you, but also originally by totally different people, they're bound to be very different, unique characters with their own very distinct perspectives. And
for sure, yeah.
I mean, we did it, guys. There's a segue. Perspectives.
Yes, perspectives.
We're on theme now.
Let's
We did it.
go.
We can end it here. We hit
Close the
perspectives,
No, we
guys.
just-
we said the thing. We're done.
We just got here.
No. Actually, as far as like theme relevant discussion, it's interesting. Like in previous episodes for this, Secrets of Slumber has actually come up briefly because we kind of inevitably ended up touching on some things, two things in particular, that are very relevant to Secrets of Slumber's storytelling. Those being,
Okay.
one, alternating character perspectives, because you do shift focus between your characters, because naturally you, having based this on a D&D party, you're not gonna have one main character, are you?
No.
And two, having a narrator with their own personality, agendas, and biases, because you definitely have one of those.
Yes, the narrator is fun. Like the original idea for the narrator was just me. It was me being gushing and fangirling about the story and talking about it, and then eventually it developed into more than that. And I'm just like, and so we like where it's going with that. But initially it was just me just squeeing and all the internet terms for just being a big fan of what was happening and liking what was going on, and I needing to tell somebody else about it because it's just so freaking good.
Just to add to that, it was almost a necessity to have multiple voices, because there was multiple characters going through it. One of the characters is like the voice of the DM, not in this story, but in the campaign. So when the narrator became sentient, and was a thinker and someone who could interact with the story through telling it, I think it became important sure that narrator voiced each character in their chapter a little bit differently, because they all do have different thoughts and opinions, and Marv does an excellent job of capturing that. But I'm sure there's a moment that you're talking about that really kind of brought that narrator to life.
Oh, there definitely is. It's probably
No spoilies, but ooh.
It may have.
I don't want to spoil that moment
because
because it's so good.
You've just touched on exactly the thing I really wanted to address, which is the really unique thing about Secrets of Slumber is that usually a story, right? They have their third party narrator, they're like, be it that omniscient, limited, whatever, their third person telling of the story, or they have first person with shifting perspectives, and you kind of have a little of both, which is it's really unique, and I've never stumbled across anything quite like it.
Part of the reason for that might be because, I mean, sometimes, most of the time, rather, Marv's writing a chapter. Every now and then, I'll throw one in there. So we're automatically writing with different voices. And I will tell you, I've taken a creative writing class many, many years ago. I'm not a writer, so, and when it comes to the rules, I'm just breaking them because I don't know them. So a lot of the unique narration style, when I'm at least doing some writing for this, comes from the fact that I don't know how I'm supposed to write a narrator, and I'm just having fun with it. Is that being too honest?
It's fine. I mean, I think you sell yourself short as a writer to an extent. Feels like a rude way of saying it, because like whatever technical proficiency you think you like, you're clearly a very good world builder.
Yeah, and like even as like the professionals say, if you know all the rules, and then the good writers end up just breaking them anyways, and they end up because they break them right and properly, and so us breaking certain rules, whether we know them or not, we're obviously doing them okay if we got people enjoying and reading it. So
I mean, my book is third person and follows, but like limited primarily to one character outside of the prologue, and then I have one chapter from a totally different character's perspective, and then shift back to the original. So you can play around with shit like that a lot.
Well, actually, originally with the perspective, actually, I originally was going to write it completely like third person omniscient, where it was just like the storyteller or re-storyteller as they dub themselves, just constantly jumping from person to person and just being omnipresent everywhere. But then I found that I wasn't able to actually sit with a character and in their thoughts too well because of where my own brain was going. So I'm like, okay, if I'm jumping around, I gotta do this, do that. And I'm like, you know what? I need to just have a character focus so I can still have that omniscientness happening, but have it still limited to them just sticking to one character for each chapter or section of a chapter because it just made it easier for me to like just sit and stew with because that was usually how I write things. It's usually just third person and it's per chapter and whatnot. If I do switch perspectives, so I was like, okay, let me have the quirky reteller talking about stuff, but following the one character to make it a little bit easier to stew with the character and their thoughts and what they're doing. So that's kind of how that came about. And also, while writing, thank you. And also while writing, to start off, tried to what was I gonna say? Tried to channel Dan while writing because Dan he is a great storyteller in how he describes things and does things. Because like I've played D&D in several groups with him and had him as a player in one of my campaigns, and he's great with like describing and doing things. And so I'm just like, okay, how would Dan tell this story? And like also trying to embody how he told me a bunch of the stuff that happened in the campaign he was running. So I tried to also portray that a bit. I was like, I'm gonna be Whimsy and I'm gonna be Dan. And yes, and so that's kind of the mishmash of finally how I kind of found the voice of what I wanted for the story.
Yeah, and I can't stress enough that I feel like quirky reteller, whilst a very accurate assessment, undersells this narrator a lot. Your narrator is a character in italics. They have a very
yes, they are.
They have a very clear personality. They clearly have their own biases and agendas and perspective on things. They arguably try to manipulate the audience, although as of yet I would suggest not in an intentionally malicious way. They even seem to be able to interact with the world of Slumber themselves to an extent. They are they are honestly one of my favorite characters in the story, despite the fact they are not a character in the story.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say whether they are or they aren't a character in the story, because for all we know, they might be or they might not be.
As of yet,
what I
they
can
are not.
say, what I can say is that, like, the concept of the unreliable narrator, like when like I'm biased about the situation. Here we have a narrator who might literally be lying because it's fun. And they absolutely and one particular moment change the viewpoint of one of the characters so they're seeing something that's definitely not happening and the character knows it's not happening, but it's just more fun that way, because the narrator wanted to tell it that way.
I'd
So
completely forgotten about that. That was
so
insane.
so while we do have an unreliable narrator, he's only making sure that the story is at least being told properly.
Yeah, it's like it's not an unreliable narrator in the sense that they are trying to sugarcoat or conceal in the traditional sense. Their agenda in this case does genuinely seem to be they're just trying to make the story as entertaining as possible, which is hilarious.
Yeah, because like I like reading things and having fun, and I didn't want it to be too serious, even though there are some serious stuff that like themes that do pop up, and it's something that can make I like if I can read something that will make me laugh and cry, I find it's a great piece of work, regardless of what other people think or criticize, and so that's what I also wanted. I want something that make you laugh, maybe make you feel emotions, but if it can make you feel things, then I feel like my job there is I'm doing it right.
Absolutely. And I think Marv really does that well, and I couldn't have asked for a better author for this story, because this world is filled with tragedy, and every story that every character has begins with sadness, like with loss, with memory, with identity crisis, with confusion. And the fact that it's a sad story, but we're able to bring so much light into it, I think gives it a balance without diluting some of the seriousness behind some of the character arcs that are happening here.
It's a very common refrain on this podcast that you can't have a story that is all grimdark, all misery, and expect that misery to hit as hard, because your audience will get desensitized to it. Both when you mix it, when you mix and match the light and the dark, you get the light stuff makes the heavy stuff hit harder because it pierces through it, and the happy stuff feels happier because it's in contrast to the negativity. So I think you nailed that concept.
Thank you.
We'll just have to work on keeping on nailing that.
Please do.
Because now I'm scared.
Right? Now we have we can disappoint people now. Oh no.
You better live up to it.
The pressure now.
Yeah. What if we would just retire after chapter 18?
I have chapter 19's done and 20's almost done, so we could at least
if
finish
you left it
20.
here, I would be horrified. Without giving spoilers, and I'm confident Marv knows exactly what I'm talking about when I say this.
Yeah.
There is something going on in chapters sort of 16 and 17 that I very much would like answers about.
Yeah. Yes.
Because
as we both tried to remember what's happening in chapter 16.
I have the story, like my document's up right now, so I clicked on chapter 16. I'm like, what happened there?
It is something to do with the narrator.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you want to know.
Yep.
I ain't telling you.
That. Oh, that was a fun chapter to write.
Yeah, that was a chapter.
I bet it was, because I'm sure as you were writing it, you both had the moment of going, this is going to infuriate everyone who reads it. In the best kind of way. I
didn't think that, actually. Like, I don't share my writing all that time. I don't know what impact a lot of the stuff I'll have. I just know people are like, oh, this is great. I'm like, thanks. You've actually been like one of a couple people who have, contacted me directly and are like, oh my God, all my feels. And I'm like, oh, I'm okay. You're enjoying this and feeling emotions of all the things. Great. Okay, it's definitely a new for me to have people be impacted.
My emotions about that particular chapter can be largely summed up as, what is happening, in all caps?
As the line of the story says, what's sorry. Like, what is our tagline? Isn't it like things are exactly what they seem to be or not? I don't even remember. How horrible of a writer am I that I don't even know what our tagline is for the... Just it's gonna be wild. That's all I can say. It's a wild thing. Don't settle into what you think is gonna happen. Expect unexpected and expected things. Because it's just
already completely shattered all my expectations. I didn't go into it thinking this narrator was going to be a person who was talking directly at me, and then they were. And then this happened, and I was like, I give up.
Well, I mean, I like to keep the audience on their toes. And I can tell you that, like, chapter 16, I went too far. And Marv definitely helped bring it back from the edge of ridiculousness and find a perfect balance of, okay, this amount of crazy and no further.
I can only imagine what the too far version was.
I don't remember what the too far version was, but I do remember
then it never happened, and no one will ever need to talk about it again.
Of course. I just remember being like, oh, that's an interest. Okay. Because that's a Dan chapter. Like, the chapters that are primarily from other people's perspectives are Dan, because Dan has said that he never played the PC characters, and so he feels more comfortable writing from other NPC perspectives. And so, like, the chapters are like 10, and then 10 and 16 so far I've been like mainly Dan chapters. Then I come in and like, fix little things up like he does as well. Like, for my chapter, I write it. He'll edit / add in some things here to there to like, add more to it and such. But like in the Dan chapters, yeah, he did that. And I'm like, okay, why did you do that? And then he explained why. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I will accept this. And
thanks for the warning, Dan.
Yeah. I mean, so like I've lived in the mind of our major villain because that's who I played. That was one of the characters I played running the campaign. I've lived in the mind of one of the other. There's a genie character that kind of caused mischief throughout the campaign, and he's present in the book, so I know his motivations. And I like the folks around town, the NPCs. They were whose minds I lived in. So every now and then, I just want to go in and be like, "But what's happening over here?" And I'll write a little thing.
Got the right narrator for it.
I mean, and the narrator pops around town, he gets around, or they get around, or she gets around.
Actually, now that I think about it, right, your narrator character kind of reminds me of like the narrators in like old cartoons who would like sometimes break the fourth wall or do
I.
the complete opposite and like directly address the characters to like mock them.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm not thinking of any specific examples, but I know exactly the type of narrator I'm talking about.
I think of the Stanley Parable right now. That's
Which
what I'm thinking about.
that's one of the episodes that precedes this one is actually the Stanley Parable.
Oh, nice! Love the
uh,
I
game.
mean, fantastic game.
Very good.
Uh, Interesting, like and similarly, to be honest, the Stanley Parable narrator didn't seem to have full control over the world of the game you're playing in. And I mean, if the narrator in Secrets of Slumber did have full control of the story, there wouldn't be a story. Because everything would just have a happy ending from point one. So, I mean, there's definitely some similarities there.
Yeah, they don't strike me as a godlike figure playing Puppet Master necessarily. They really do feel like they are on just along for the ride, just this chaotic entity who is just trying to spice the story up for the sake of the audience, which is wild.
Yeah.
Actually, the other thing they kind of remind me of, and this is a very different vibe, I would really, but they kind of remind me of like a traditional Greek chorus. I don't
I'm not
know.
familiar with that.
Absolutely, I see where you're
Yeah.
coming from.
I don't know how familiar you guys are with like the structure of like old Greek theater, but uh,
No.
well, for Marv's benefit and the benefit of the audience who have missed the other episodes this has come up in traditional Greek theater, like ancient Greek theater, there would be a group called the chorus, who was a group of people. I think they traditionally would wear masks, even, uh, and they sort of filled the role of the narrators of the story and they could
Okay.
also interact with the characters in the story, much like our cartoony narrator. So they would talk. They would be almost an intermediary, and they would interact with the characters in the story inform them of things. They would narrate the story, and they would also talk to the audience. So
Okay.
yeah, so your narrator is zany and wild, but is actually drawing on a really long tradition of similar characters.
And a good
Repeats
modern day
itself.
example of that, I would say, is Legally Blonde the musical. Has a great Greek chorus throughout the whole thing, um, in the form of more blonde characters.
Nice.
Kind of an aside.
Actually, if you want an example, another example of a chorus from like more, I use modern as a bit of a structure at this point, I guess. Have you seen the Hercules movie, Marv? The Disney one?
Of course, I am a Disney kid.
Yeah. It has a Greek chorus.
The
Literally, they are Greek.
Muses! Ah! I love them.
Yeah.
I love that
Beautiful and
play because
perfect.
they're literally in Greece.
Yeah, it's a terribly inaccurate story to the mythology, but they nailed the idea of
Oh,
the
yeah.
chorus.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, so you definitely draw with this narrator on a surprisingly long history of characters in their archetype. You definitely make it your own. Don't get me wrong, they have a very distinct voice, but it's
Nice.
kind of cool that you were just like the latest version of this idea, putting your own spin in it. It's very neat. I always love it when like you stumble across something modern that is actually something really old reimagined.
Happy accidents.
Happens all the time in storytelling.
I mean, they're staples because they work. They help
True.
they help tell the story while also making sure that like the characters can't know everything, but the narrator needs to be able to tell the audience things. And
Yes.
in this case, the narrator mostly is telling us what our characters are doing and thinking and kind of giving those perspectives. But there's times when our readers deserve to know just a little bit more than what our characters do. So
Yeah, I mean, one of the benefits is that you have created this narrator character whose entire objective is to make the story as engaging as possible. And you definitely use that to your advantage by having them clearly pick and choose the things they want to reveal for the biggest impact. Like
Mm-hmm.
There are
And I
certain
think that
things they definitely could have told us sooner, but chose not to because they knew it would make the story more interesting.
And I think that takes a lot of the pressure off of me and Marv, because if the narrator is the person who makes the story interesting, then we don't have to as much. So I really appreciate the
you
work of the
do
narrator
because you
there.
guys are the voice behind the narrator. But what if
Or
it
are
helps you
we?
sleep at night?
Are we? Or is
If
the
you tell
narrator
me this
just
is AI,
sentient?
we're stopping this now.
No,
Oh,
it
it's
is not.
absolutely
No,
not AI.
no, it's not. You think an AI could come up with this? Come on.
AI wishes it was this insane.
They wish.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
But what I can say is that this story is definitely heading in some very, very interesting directions. And I can't wait to see that written down. I honestly, I can't wait to read my own story. This is so surreal, having something that I've played and I know the ending to, or at least one possible ending to, but have it actually come to life like this, being able to read it every 2 weeks and be like, haha, this is the thing, we created this. It's just such an amazing feeling. So I said it in my blurb when on the Secrets of Slumber website there, and I'll say it again here. Marv, thank you, because I would never have written this down. So just you rock, and I appreciate you
Aw.
so much.
Thank you for letting me do this and for constantly being a consultant. And you're welcome for writing because it's fun and it gives me an excuse to ignore my other projects that I should be doing.
My audience is so used to me being a complete jackass that this wholesomeness is going to be such a surprise breath of fresh air.
Aw.
Well, in that case, we'll be mean to each other. You ninny head. No, I can't do it.
Fudu, Banth of Pudu, that's what it is. I couldn't remember what it was. I don't know. I've known Dan for like 10-ish years, so we've been through it.
But yeah, no, like hold on to that feeling and enjoy it because it is genuinely great when you get to go back to something you've created and find that you actually still like it. I
Right?
Yeah.
Once I had published my book, I did not look at it at all for a
Mm.
while. Then one of my readers I know pointed out that there was a bunch of typos that had slipped through the
Oh
editing
no.
process. So I had to read back through the entire thing to find the
Oh no.
typos so I could fix them. So just as a side note, if you're one of the people who bought the first run of the book, sorry. uh,
I mean, misprints are worth more.
oh, good. In that case, actually, you're welcome. But when I got to the end, I'd finished reading and going through that process. I was like, oh shit, I like it. That's good.
Yay.
So
That's always good, yeah. I'm always worried that I'll eventually because some of my old stuff I'm like, "Oh my God, what was I thinking?"
oh
Because,
yeah. No.
you
Conversely, if you go back and reread
uh,
something and go, wow, it's terrible, it's awful. But when you get to hit that high of like reading your own story back, and
yeah,
you
it's
get
really
you get
nice.
to have that weird mix of just enjoying it as a story once you're divorced enough from the writing process, as well as the
Hmm.
pride of the fact you enjoy it just as a story.
Yeah.
And you have definitely earned that feeling. Like, I am not one to heap praise unnecessarily, but I am thoroughly enjoying this serial.
I'm so happy. And it's been fun to rework the story so much as well because even yesterday Dan came over and we were hashing out the next bit and then I'm like, I don't like this thing that happens, it stresses me out, we need to simplify it. He's like, well, how can we do that? I'm like, okay, how about we do this? And he's like, if we do that we have to do this. And I'm like, oh, because of this it's gonna be this. And then we literally dance because we've managed to still have everything that's going to happen but in a slightly different way. And it's just brain expansion and it's fun. It's it's like another timeline of his story and it's so much fun to do that and make things work because I know I'll accidentally while writing I'll accidentally do something or mention something and I'm like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, I misread what your notes were, time to think of a way to make it make sense for the future.
It's
And
canon now.
it's canon now, and so we did that for quite a few things that have happened, and we've managed to make it work okay so far, and nobody knows. Nobody knows.
One of the major villains of this story is the fact that I took terrible notes during my campaign. So starting off, we did not have a lot to work with other than a few quick blurbs, character descriptions, and my memory. So piecing it all back together again has also been a fun project.
I'm not gonna lie to you. In the plotter versus Patzer debate, I am very much a plotter. Your writing process sounds like it would give me an aneurysm. It sounds
I'm a plantser. I'm a full-on plantser. I like have to plan with a rough outline and then expect things to change and divert. But it's also a little bit more harder because I'm writing a web series where I'm literally writing a chapter a week, or now chapter every other week for now, and editing it and then putting it out like one chapter every 2 weeks. So I don't have a lot of time to like make sure all the through lines are all cohesive. There's sometimes like there's a couple things that have happened and I'm like, let me reread these old chapters because I'm not sure if I mentioned this thing or not. And so then I go do that. I'm like, okay, I did mention it. Good thing I caught that, or else this would have been contradictory. And so it's challenging in that. And so it's just like I constantly have to go back and reread stuff because I'm like, I don't know if I've mentioned it. Let me search these keywords in case. To make it all work, but it's
I would love to write like a serialized story like you've done, or do a comic or something like that releases a bit of story every week. I've mentioned that on my site recently. Like that's something I would really like to do in the future. But if I ever attempt that, I'm gonna go after that with the same energy as I do with the podcast, which is I'm going to have as big a buffer as possible. Because my life is very unreliable, and the idea of getting to a week and not having the content there when an audience is expecting it is terrifying.
Yeah, we started off with a decent buffer, and then weekly uploads, it caught up on me, and I'm just like, yeah, I can't do every week. We got to go down to every other week, and currently there is no backlog, so I'm trying to get back to a backlog, but it's been a time because I've also been writing. I've been writing another novel on the side too, so I'm like, I don't have the time, but I'll try. But it's it's working out so far.
It's alright. The last few episodes of the last season of the podcast had a big delay between them because I just got hit by a barrage of technical difficulties.
Oh no.
Yeah. So I understand. I feel your pain. Good luck to you.
Thank you. I need it, but so far we are kind of okay. Like last week we did miss a week, but 2 chapters are coming out. Well, by the time this comes out, it'll already be out. But this week we're putting out 2 chapters to make up for it. So.
Oh yeah, like just as a testimony to how adamant I am about having a buffer. At the time of recording this, no episodes of this season have actually gone live. And they have
nice.
And they are just about to release chapter 18, I think.
Yes, 18 and 19 will be going up on the 9th. 19 is halfway done. I should have it done by tomorrow.
Yeah. And just to cause some controversy, I've heard every single episode of this podcast because it's been released every single week, and it's amazing, and you should listen to the rest of it. He lied lyingly.
Yeah,
but it's still going to be amazing.
I don't believe that because I'm
subscribe to this channel.
But you absolutely should do what he said anyway.
Yes.
To try and get back on topic for a little bit.
Yes.
So we've talked a lot about the narrator because of course we have.
Of course we have.
But as I said earlier on, one of the really interesting things you do is that you are still, despite having a narrator who is in and of themselves a character in italics, you still alternate where the narrator's lens is pointed and shift focus perspective, which creates a really unique feel. So we've got this rather unreliable narrator's gaze, and we follow it settling on these different characters consistently rather than sticking to this broader omniscient view. So you have this really unique and interesting setup of seeing things as experienced by individual characters from sort of their perspective, but filtered through the lens of this really unreliable third party with their own ideas, perceptions, and agenda.
Yeah, because just the pure omniscient was just too much. I just felt like I couldn't find a proper voice that I could stick with, and it felt like I was having too much information to be needed. Like, I didn't know how much or how little. It was just like too much power, and my ADHD was, just like, no, I need to focus because I'm obsessed over having everything known and stuff. So yeah, having the switch in perspective of character, because it's made things a lot easier, and choosing which character is all based on like, okay, what's happening in the scene, who's going to be most impacted by said scene, who will give like the most interesting perspective of the scene, and like so that's usually what drives what perspective, especially if they're all together and stuff. Like, okay, what should we tell? There's like so many, it's much of this like different parts and stuff. Oh, I should write this, but it's like, oh, what's the point of this scene? Is this scene going to actually help anything, or is it just me just following them around and nothing really actually happening? So
I didn't even have to ask the question. You answered it already.
oh, perfect. It was
Yeah, what was the question?
Oh,
yeah,
I
what
was
was the question?
I was gonna ask, what goes into determining where the narrator
Oh,
is gonna look at any given time.
oh yes,
Yeah.
but yes, that is it. Yeah, because
I mean, Marv
whoever
has created. Sorry, I keep
no,
cutting people off. I'll
you're
say
good.
this: Marv has created some amazingly lovable characters. And so being able to explore their different philosophies, ideas, wants, and desires through this narrator was very important. While
Mhm.
progressing the story forward. When Marv was talking about like what does this scene matter? What does it mean? Like how does it drive the story forward? One of the chapters that she asked me to write would have had them all in a tavern discussing events that have just happened and kind of talking about that. And to be honest, it was intimidating for me to be like, all right, that's a lot of different voices in one scene. That's a lot of different opinions flying. That's a lot of different thoughts and feelings going on in their mind. So I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to tell that story, but from the perspective of somebody who wasn't even there. And I shot the narrator all the way across town, and we looked at it through the eyes of the reports of what happened and what went down instead, kind of fleshing out a different character altogether. And I think that helped me relieve some of the narrative tension while still driving it forward, while still having the scene that we wanted, but also giving the readers a different perspective and on the city from different eyes. So it's been fun to kind of yo-yo the narrator around.
Yeah,
I
I
have way
mean,
too much fun with it anyway.
one of I think as a reader, one of the things that I've been finding amusing about this setup is that there's almost this implicitness that wherever we're looking isn't necessarily where the objectively most interesting thing is happening. Where we are being pointed at is where the narrator thinks the most objectively interesting thing is happening. So, like, obviously, from like a actual meta perspective, of course, you are writing from the like whilst looking at where the most entertaining, engaging, captivating stuff is happening. But having this extra layer of this unreliable narrator doing this creates this implied manipulation or control situation where they are where this character is deciding for the audience where they should be looking, where the interesting stuff is happening. Because unless they're lying to us, their only real objective is to make the story as interesting possible. But because they have their own personality, their version of as interesting as possible isn't necessarily going to be the same thing as the audience's.
I mean, what do you think, Marv? Should we do this choose your own adventure? Like, if you want the next chapter from so and so's perspective, like,
No.
turn to page 36.
No, 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 no.
I,
That's no,
no,
no.
that sounds like hell doing a like full serial length choose your own adventure.
So
That
no,
wasn't
that'd
a
be too
critique. I
chaotic.
love that about the story. I think it's hilarious.
I also find it so funny that you're like drawing all this stuff from the writing, and I'm sitting here like, I, if that's what you draw from it, cool. I just wrote it, and this sounded right and cool. And if art is, what's the like, if you're pulling from the art from
Subjectivity.
what you are, yeah. I didn't intend any of the stuff that you're gushing about, and I'm like, okay, peel back the curtain there. A lot
I
of
mean,
this.
the good thing about stuff like this is you didn't have to. Sometimes the most interesting things about a story are completely unintentional. Like you
Yeah.
may not have intended this, But the choices you made by choosing to have multiple like shifting focus with this weird third party narrator who is trying to tell this story created implicitly the scenario where of course that means that they are showing us what they think is the most interesting thing. If you it would
Yeah.
it depending how you did it, it could either be horrible to read or very funny. But I would not be at all surprised if, like, 30 chapters from now, we got a segment where something objectively really cool was happening, like, a mile away, and the narrator was intentionally pointing us at something else because they thought it was more interesting. That's not necessarily a suggestion, don't take it as one, but I could absolutely see that happening because this is the scenario you've created.
So Marv, that thing we talked about last night where the thing happens,
Yeah.
pretty much that, right?
Yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
I love being vague.
Yeah.
Vague is
What a
good.
time.
Vague means people are going to want to know what the hell you're talking about and they're going to read it.
It's so
Hey,
good.
listen, in 30 years, if you're an English student and you're studying this in class for whatever reason, if
Oh my
like this
God.
suddenly this becomes a famous work of art, it's not going to. I just want to say on the record right now, I met every single metaphor. All the symbolism is actually valid and was purposeful.
Why would
And
you do
definitely
this?
and it's definitely not something that we didn't think about at all.
I do not make that same claim. I leave the art to be interpreted. But, if you find, I like finding patterns in doing things. Like, I literally sometimes with the perspective, I just look at, I'm like, who hasn't had a chapter in a while? Okay, this person hasn't. Do they have more chapters than other people? No. Okay, then I'll do them, So, that's maybe sometimes how I do it. Who knows? But I like patterns and stuff. So if you find patterns, then that's great. I sometimes will do that with my writing as well. Like, I'll write something and I'm like, oh, what if I do this and add this little extra layer? Maybe that'll happen eventually, but it might not. Who knows? But if you find it, cool. You'll have to ask me if I'm still alive.
If for some reason there's a reason why a character would not be present for something interesting happening around, you've already created yourself the perfect out because your narrator is sentient and can go, oh, you want to know why you haven't seen Cyrus for a while? It's not important. You can just
maybe.
do that with this narrator, which is nuts.
Could.
I mean, it's either lazy writing or brilliant writing, and I'll leave that up to the judges.
Or you just
why not both?
forget about it.
Work smarter, not harder. Not always sentiment that holds true, especially when it comes to something like the arts, but like if you have this creation at your disposal, you may as well use it to its fullest.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun and it's a great story. I'm biased because I'm writing it, but it's a great story.
No, you're right.
I agree. It's a great story. Everyone should read this.
I mean,
please click the links.
Should. Yeah, there will be links. Don't you worry.
Yay.
On that note, though, we are pretty much getting to the sort of 1 hour-ish mark, and whilst we probably could go on about like what the different perspectives themselves bring to each scene or whatever, arguably, I think it would be better if the audience just went and read it. So I think we can probably leave that there.
Cool.
Dan has, of course, informed us that he is just going to be a nebulous force behind this story and has no social media presence or other projects whatsoever to plug right now. But I think you do other stuff, Marv.
Oh yeah, I do so much stuff on the internet. Too much stuff, you would say. I'm spread so thin. Yeah, I'm Marv_Missy on most platforms. Twitter, I will not call it X until he actually changes the URL, which he never will. So it's Twitter.
Never going to call it X.
No, so like on Twitter, Blue Sky, Twitch. I stream on Twitch on most weekends, so if you want to catch me over there.
Very entertaining. I catch her streams as often as I can.
I need to. I've actually been meaning to for a while. I've just never gotten around to it.
Well, we had fun over there. I cried a lot last weekend because we finished this one game. It killed me. It was so sad, but also, it was just powerful.
Well, you heard it here. Go find Marv Missy on Twitch if you would like to see Marv cry.
Well, I have a PNG tuber. She doesn't have a crying emotion yet, but you can hear my sobs and blowing my nose.
That worked.
Yeah.
And yeah, as always, if you're listening to this over on Google Podcasts or Spotify, you can also find these episodes on my website, radfordwrites.com, where I also share the transcripts for the stories that pop up during these podcasts and poetry and other stories and stuff like that. Not going to be a transcript from this one because I didn't write it, but there will be links posted somewhere where you can find the actual story, which you should go to. Also do like blog posts and articles and things over there to talk about things I like talking about, which is, well, writing, oddly enough. So yeah, go check out all of those things right now, immediately. Go do it.
Yes.
And
Go.
We will catch you next time.
Bye. Thank you for having us.